welcome back again. Another week, and we will cover, as usual, the week that was. I know we're in different parts of the world, and I'm hiding in my old office now. We're not in lockdown. I'm back in the office tidying up things. But this week, we really want to focus on what is going on in Ethiopia. We are all worried, concerned. We can use whatever words we want. So we will start talking about Ethiopia, and Berhan will start telling us what's the latest and what's happening and what we can do. And then we have a guest joining us from the Gambia, Bajul Katim, who will join us later on, who will also share his ideas with us. So those of us here, I guess we know each other, so we don't have to introduce, but as usual, perhaps if you can start with your name and so on for the other people who are watching us through the social media. So we will start. So Berhan, what is going on?
Well, look, this is really a big question that the region is in a big crisis, starting from Ethiopia, where, the Americans has flew their envoy 2 days ago, and they're holding both sides at a question of to resolve it in a compromise. But they don't seem both sides to, and any one of them they're not prepared to give up. So the problem is, to be honest with you, if they let these things continue, the region will be in turmoil. And the worst is, the elephant in the room is the Eritrean president, who has been a catalyst, have got a role in this. And he will not settle with just allowing the Tigrayans march in Ethiopia, even though they are doing their job and they're getting there. But what will wait at the other end is the question that we all need to be worried, because if this war continues, it will create another Rwanda. And I see that Rwanda coming in our region if these two sides have come to terms to agree or terms to accept, or we should get a new sort of government from all the independent players of every group to settle their difference. And this to, the people on the heading of that hate between them should not be part of this peace process, which is very hard to call. Okay, but the way the Tigrayans are going, in fact, the Tigrayans have reached Wollo. If you know where Wollo is, about 500 kilometers from Addis Ababa. Okay, it's an Amhara region, and it is on the west of Addis Ababa.
Yeah.
And possible this will create create another havoc if the Tigrayans march to Addis Ababa, and also on the other side, the Oromos are on the march as well. The Benishangul are also on the other side. So the question is, as you've heard last time, the Kenyans have put their hands up to say, well, too many refugees coming our way, and we want this to settle in Ethiopia. But most importantly, Ethiopia has been the center of the African crisis, with the EU being in Addis Ababa. And no one in the international arena see Ethiopia's failure will collapse many African organizations who are linked to this. The institutions that has been there for a long time will be UN, AU, African Union, you name it, they're all there. So the question is, where will this take? If this civil war gets to Addis Ababa, what does it mean from every player, not only the internal players, like what happened in Rwanda? Rwanda was limited to its own people, and the international, mostly where the colonial masters were partly there. But in Ethiopia, all African countries have a stake. And most importantly was that also the UN has a stake as sitting place with the AU, and the European Union has, the US has, So all these players see this, not from, like Sudan is in the same turmoil, but Sudanese situation is more different than the Ethiopian from a global perspective, from the regional point of view. So there is no issue that these two groups have to settle, or they should put any price to get this either or. Both of them agree, or one of them should be kicked out in any way, or whatever that the players will look. So the Americans sent their envoy, which was on Thursday, arrived in Addis Ababa, and has created a new sort of, well, they have influence on both sides to stop the rebels in where they are, and the government also to try to meddle in some arguments. But unfortunately, Abiy don't seem to be accepting any terms in moving forward.
Yeah, well, thanks for that preamble, Brahan. But the people who are watching us, some of them, they don't know the detail. They don't really understand some of the intricacies of what's happening in the Horn of Africa. And today we have a guest all the way from West Africa, from the Gambia. Katim Stranger Toure is a friend of mine from long time ago, and I want to introduce him today to our audience. And there are a lot of things I can tell you about Katim, but the area that I really want to emphasize today is his interest in the unity of the continent, or the unity of African continent. And it's that perspective that we really want to pick on his brain, and hopefully he can share with us from West Africa, how, Katim, do you see what's going on in the Horn of Africa? The other day when we talked about this, I was really enjoying the discussions you were making about the 77 war between Somalia and Ethiopia and a lot of other references. But really the floor is yours, and we from the Horn of Africa, although we are in different parts of the world, today we want to hear your views on what do you think is going on in Ethiopia. I guess we started with Sudan last week and the week before, but now it seems the whole region is bubbling. So over to you, Katim. Welcome. Can you hear us?
Ibrahim, assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. I should say good evening to you. It's just very early morning for me here in the Gambia. It's my pleasure to join all of you in this conversation. I think it's a fantastic forum that you have. I always keep telling my friends, that God is not wicked, that if God were wicked, he would have brought in the COVID-19 before WhatsApp and Zoom and everything. So this is one palliative that we can always use. There are opportunities and communication channels that we never, not even had before, but we never even dreamed. It used to be many years ago, if you call long distance from wherever you are in the world to home, you'd be shaking and shivering because the money, you would just see your money just going. And now everybody's so relaxed and communicating in, 24 hours a day from all over the world. It's really, really, really amazing, So it's my pleasure to join you. As Ibrahim said, we had a brief conversation about the situation in Ethiopia. Of course, it's disturbing to everyone who is not only African, but anybody who cares about humanity, and a lot of humanity should be worried about the situation in Ethiopia. We've seen and heard a lot of stories about Ethiopia that just are not encouraging all these years, dating back to at least, for those of us who are my age group, dating back to 1983, 84, when we had the infamous famine, that led to the Live Aid concerts and really brought Ethiopia in a bad way, I should say, to the map. And I remember I was telling Ibrahim that one of the things that disturbs me about all these disturbances, all these conflicts, is that there is a generation of young Africans who are growing up just looking at white faces as their salvation, because what happens is a situation where you have a war, a conflict, you have displacement, and then these kids and their parents, the refugees, go to refugee camps, and who are manning the refugee camps is these aid groups from Western countries, mainly white women, and they come and feed these kids, and they look up. When they look up from a bowl of porridge or whatever have you, what they see is a white girl, a white face that is giving them nourishment. On the other hand, whenever we see a black person, it's somebody with a gun ready to kill them or rape their mother or their sister. And it's a horrible situation to be in as Africans. And I think we all have collective responsibility and culpability for all of this, especially our leadership. They've really abdicated their responsibility to serve the interest of our people and make sure we have our place in the world and take our place with dignity and pride as we should. When you look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia is unique in so many respects. Just to concur here with Dr. Ahmed, that Ethiopia is different uniquely from the other conflicts because it is so critical to the infrastructure of African institutions that we have, the AU. It is center also of the UN Regional Bureau for Africa, UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa. It's the head of the economic community of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, and on and on and on and on. So, as I was telling an Ethiopian friend of mine, failure is just is not an option in Ethiopia. And unfortunately for them, they basically, for lack of a better word, how can I put it? They painted themselves into a corner. Going back to the fall of the military regime that was not the military regime, but the Mengistu regime that was overthrown by the TPLF-led group, that's Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, rebel groups in 1991. When the Tigrayans came, the Tigrinyas came, they basically set up, did a new constitution that basically effectively said that, look, we're a multi-ethnic country. We're going to have a federalist system along along ethnic lines, which I think was completely a disaster as far as I'm concerned. Because now if you go to Ethiopia, you'll find a situation where you have these regional states that have everything an independent country has except a Minister of External Affairs and then an army. And then even with an army, to some extent, they have their own security forces. As a matter of fact, when the Ethiopian government attacked Tigray, they were seeking help from the army, the Amhara region's own army itself. So it goes to show they're just almost there in terms of independence. They're independent in all but name, basically. So that creates a very, very, very difficult situation. And I think, in fact, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I think the constitution even says that the regions have a right to secede from Ethiopia. As a matter of fact, I was just I remember listening to an interview with one of the Ethiopian leaders, the Tigrinya leaders. He was being asked whether they want to secede from Ethiopia. He didn't say as much, but you could sense the sentiment that they had. That at the end of the day, they were more interested in getting Tigray away from Ethiopia than actually holding Ethiopia as a single federalist state. Now, what I always tell my African friends is that what I've seen, is that when you have these conflicts that are based on ethnicity, regionalism, or whatever have you, frequently it is the common people that actually get the brunt of the consequences, devastating consequences of these conflicts. The elites will still remain elites. If Tigray were independent today, the majority of the Tigrayans would be dirt poor. They wouldn't have anything to show for it. A classic example is look at South Sudan. I remember in the early mid-2000s, meeting some American in the airport lounge in Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi. I'll never forget the conversation we had because that guy told me quite categorically, clearly, that they were going to break up the Sudan. That's what he told me. And that's what they did. And now look what happened. South Sudan can't find peace. The rump Sudan can't find peace. And we are all paying the consequences, of this folly or the hubris that is that the international political order has given us. Now, I should say that, my interest in Ethiopia stems also from the fact that I've been there a number of times, both to attend meetings, some of them with Ibrahim, but I've also had the opportunity of doing consulting work for the UNDP there. I was there in 2019, and I helped them prepare a comprehensive agricultural program document. And just a few months ago, I wrapped up with them another assignment what we were doing was to incorporate what they call the HDP, Humanitarian Development and Peace Nexus, into their 10-year development plan. And they are also multi-year resilient strategy, which is like a disaster disaster sort of like a management strategy. So, and in that time, or in those assignments, like in the first one, when we do the agricultural program document, project development, I traveled to Ethiopia. This was before the COVID-19. I had the opportunity to travel around to, I went to Oromia, I went to Awasa, and then from there I went to Amhara, Bahardar, Bure, and all those places. And I was just, and I'd been in Ethiopia. My first time in Ethiopia was like about 1989, and the contrast couldn't be imagined, actually, because when I was there in 1989, Mengistu was there. We had a conference there, and it was a very difficult period. There was one guy, a taxi driver, was showing me the palace where Mengistu was living there. He dared not point at the palace with his finger. So he pointed at the palace with his tongue. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Am I crazy to point at the palace with my finger? They'll cut it off, And so that was the kind of Ethiopia that they were living when I was there in 1989. And then fast forward to 2019, and they're talking about agro-industrial parks, billions of dollars being spent. The infrastructure that they're building and the industries that they're building is legendary. As a matter of fact, we're looking at the 10-year development plan, what they call it TYDP. The slogan of the TYDP, that's 2021 to 2030, is that they want to make Ethiopia a beacon for Africa. And now all of that is being put at risk because of this conflict. It's really very, 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 very unfortunate, And so I was talking to Ibrahim the other day, and I said, of course, we also must not forget the international dimension to all of this. There's the local part of it, but there's also the international dimension. As Dr. Ahmed said, the U.S. envoy for the Horn of Africa was there just about a few days ago. But personally, I don't know if you or anybody else, but personally, I have my skepticism about the role of the United States in all of this. I can remember fully well in 1991 when the then Undersecretary of State for African Affairs, Herman Cohen, was on the phone talking to the Tigrinya leader about the organizations and plans for the final attack and assault on Addis Ababa to get rid of the Mengistu government. Remember, Mengistu, of course, is the guy that basically kicked out, pardon me, you are all Somalis, Siad Barre from the Ogaden region during the Somali War. But even more important than that conflict, as devastating as it was, is that it was a conflict by proxy between the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, and the United States. In the end, the party that was backed by the United States lost. And I don't think Ethiopia, Mengistu in particular, was ever forgiven by the Americans for that. So when the opportunity came for the US to basically get back at Mengistu, in the form of the TPLF and the bunch of rebels that they led, they said, you go for it and then clear this guy out. And that's what happened. Fast forward to the time that we're in now. Okay, Ethiopia has had a democracy, the Tigrinyas have been pushed out of Addis Ababa and all of that. Now you have a situation where Ethiopia is making a mad dash, an incredible dash to development with a lot of development projects and all of that. And in all of this, the Americans are absent. It is actually a development that's driven mainly in large part by Chinese investments and partnerships with Chinese companies and Chinese organizations and the Chinese government. And you can imagine the Americans being absolutely pissed by, pardon my language, by all of this. So they are not going to come out and say, look, we don't like what Mengistu is doing because he's really basically shutting us out of all of it. Ethiopia is a huge economy, 100 million people plus, the second largest, most populous country in Africa. They have a very vibrant economy. And to be completely shut out of it by the influx of Chinese businesses, I think the Americans, whether they tell you or not, it's something that they cannot stand. And they will, and that's why first that they did, you say you are going to mediate. And what do? The first thing you do then is say, okay, you're going to take off Ethiopia off the AGOA entitlement. That's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. If you're going to mediate, you're going to have to show some semblance of impartiality as far as I'm concerned. You don't start by tying Ibrahim's hand behind his back and say, okay, now you negotiate. It sends a very, very wrong signal to the Tigrayans, because you are telling them that, look, basically we're with you, keep ahead and go ahead and push, whatever have you. And talking to my friends in Ethiopia, of course, in this situation, like in any one, the first casualty they say is the truth. And so whatever my Ethiopian friends tell me, I also have to look at and take in the context of the fact that they're also partisans in this conflict. But the Ethiopian government feels very bitter about the fact that some of the development organizations, according to them, have been siding with the Tigray rebels. Now, having said that, I don't think also that the Ethiopian government itself managed their initial defeat of Tigray, the Tigrayans, when they went in to Mekelle and then overthrew the Tigrayan regional government. I think they didn't manage the conflict that ensued, where people were abused and all of that kind of stuff. In other words, they weren't magnanimous victors that they were supposed to be. And so things got out of hand. And of course, that also made it very easy for the Tigrayans to basically regroup and then fight back. They've done this all these years, dating back to the 1970s. So this is their own game. If you're going to fight the Tigrayans, you have to use some other techniques and tactics different from what they're used to, that they have used to prove that are found to be very successful in the past. In fact, when I was in Ethiopia in 2019, I remember we were in Bure. This was in Amhara Republic. And I remember one particular day, there was all of a sudden a huge commotion in town. Truckloads and busloads of people armed with their machetes and whatever have you. I asked this guy, what's going on? He said, oh, they have some conflict and whatever have you. And they were going to fight. There were some guys that were Amhara that were killed and blah, blah, whatever have you. And so it was disturbing. Same thing when I was in Oromia, going to Awasa, you still see internally displaced camps in Ethiopia. So it's still a problem. Conflict is still a problem in Ethiopia. Despite the veneer, for lack of a better word, of the development, a lot of the development that's going on, they still have quite some fundamental problems. I think, to cut the long story short, I would like to say that I'm particularly disappointed by the reaction of the African community, especially the African leadership. I know Uganda, Yoweri Museveni called for a meeting of the East African community, or IGAD, on November 14. But I'm saying, my goodness, God, that's so far away into the future. I mean, this meeting should have been held yesterday, not even today. And they're taking their, pardon my language, sweet ass time to plan for this to way into the future, like 2 weeks from now. I mean, people are dying. Why do you have to wait that long? I mean, and I think I don't see the AU in this. I don't see them taking leadership, even though they have a vested interest in this. They are actually headquartered in Addis Ababa itself. Meanwhile, again, coming back to the Americans, what do we hear from them? They are sending out a message to their non-essential staff that they should evacuate. I think they're sending a wrong message. They're basically saying that they are not buying into the prospect of a peace in the near future in Ethiopia. And I think that's really very tragic. And please pardon me for taking a little bit of rambling. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Katim. That is very interesting insight, and I didn't realize that you actually in Ethiopia so many times. But I like to allow people to ask questions. I have many questions, but as usual, I'll be fair. I'll let others ask first. So, any questions for Katim?
Well, if I can ask Katim, look, I really enjoyed your analysis, and being one of the Tigrinya speakers myself, I share a bit of that crisis in an equation. But coming back to the question of the US, the global challenges and the role of US and China and what have you. First and foremost, what you said was something that hit my heart. When refugee children are looking white women or white people being fed, the respect of us as leaders or part of that equation has been lost for a long time. Even within the African context, even now with this crisis, Abiy was approached by some of the African leaders to stop and to reconcile in the war. And he was not even giving them a damn to to take any seriousness to their issue. Now, the question is, we are as a society or as a continent, we see the white man is the solution into this crisis. And to be honest with you, for good or bad, the Americans came 2 days ago and they made the situation cool for some time. Who the hell would African leaders do that in any way, getting the two sides to accept any terms? So don't you think that as a continent, we're sliding disrespect of each other and waiting for angel to come from Europe or America?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ahmed. You raised a very interesting point. I think, you know, we are in such a bad situation in Africa because for so many years, generations and generations, we've basically had our affairs run by foreigners. You know, first by our colonials, then by our neo-colonists, you know, Americans, as I would say. And to make matters even worse, we are actually pawns in the perpetual conflict between the United States and its so-called quote-unquote adversaries. First, it was in the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, the United States is increasingly seeing China as an enemy. And so everything that they see in the international arena is seen in the context of their competition against China. You know, as a matter of fact, I think Ibrahim, I'm not sure you saw, and I wrote an article in 2019 about the war on Huawei, you know, about the US government's war on Huawei, you know, and we're all caught in this trap, as it were, you know. And some few months ago, I shared an article that was prepared by the Chinese government on poverty alleviation, their experience since the 1970s. Between 1970 and now, the Chinese government has lifted about 770 million people out of poverty, you know. And between the time Xi Jinping came to power and now, they've listed, that's 2013 to now, they've lifted about 80 to 90 million people out of poverty. And they wrote a white paper, they said, to share their experience with the world so that other people can learn from them, from their experience. And I shared the link to this white paper with my friends, my Gambian friends. And I told them that as fantastic as the job that the Chinese did, as they claim, in eradicating poverty, it must be recognized that the foundation of this work is empathy with your people. You have to feel for your people. You have to feel that you want to do something to increase the lot and lives of your people. You know, when I was in Ethiopia, in Oromia, I met some farmers, and they hadn't had, you know, it was just a very, 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 very sad discussion I had with them. They hadn't had a single drop of rain in like 3 years. All their livestock had died, okay? And then to make matters worse, they had to walk like every day about 9 kilometers to fetch water, you know? And then you leave a place like that and you go to Addis Ababa, see the infrastructure, lifestyles, people are living there and all of that stuff. You think that you are not living, not even talking about living in 2 different countries, but you are living in 2 different planets actually, you know? And I think we Africans, some of us who have been fortunate enough to have had Western education, have been too comfortable in our own elements and been completely oblivious of the lot of the common person, you know. So the fight has always been between us, the elites, and damn the consequences of that conflict for the lumpen proletariat, the poor people, and the downtrodden in Africa, you know. And Dr. Ahmed, you're right. Your namesake, Abiy Ahmed, was initially insisting that this is not a civil war. This is a purely security operation against a bunch of ragtag criminals, blah, blah, that kind of thing. But I think it must be acknowledged also that there is a fundamental issue that has to be addressed, and that is the expectations of the Tigrayas, as well as recently also the Oromas. The Oromas are also, some of them are joining forces with the TPLF to fight against the central government. So I think that has to be addressed. And I think what I would want to see is some effort be made to basically bring Abiy to the table, to make him understand that the stake are too high for them to keep brushing away efforts to broker peace. Number one. And I think number two, we also need some genuine interlocutors to come in. Not like, I personally don't trust the Americans and the role they will have in all of this. And I should also say, I'm very disappointed by the silence of the Chinese, because I would have expected that, given their involvement in Ethiopia's development, given the fact, and of course, let's remember also that all of this is mutually beneficial, probably more beneficial to China than to Ethiopia. I would have expected them to ask people, somebody, friends of Ethiopia in this time of need, for them to also come in and see what they could do in terms of facilitating a dialogue, in terms of funding peace missions by the African Union, but at least be seen and heard to actually be doing something to bring about peace in Ethiopia. But all we see is just deadening silence, And so I think the lesson we should learn from all of this is that we are on our own. We should, as Africans, really come together. We need real leadership. I don't think this thing would probably have happened, drag on this long, if, say, we had somebody like a Mandela alive. If Mandela were alive, I would have hoped that he would have at least said, look, this thing has to stop. But none of the African countries, except for maybe Museveni, is saying anything about this, at least of significance or substance. And I think it's very sad. It's a telling indictment of the present leadership of Africa. And I think maybe I'm being politically naive, but I think if I were an Eritrean, or not Eritrean, but if I were Tigrinya, if I were a Tigrayan leader, if I were an Abiy Ahmed, I would sit down and really question the sense and the value in all of this. What is going to be the end plan for all of this for Ethiopia, for Tigray? And I think at the end of the day, we should, again, like I said, maybe I'm being naive, but at the end of the day, we should look at two issues here. One is our own personal interest and inclinations. Two is the greater and more important interest of the community and the society at large. And I think what's been the problem now is that most of the time most Africans have put our own personal interest before the collective interest. And that, I think, is a tragedy of Africa today.
Self-interest and self-interest.
Yeah. What I really want to ask you is now, and I want to thank you, that was quite interesting view. Mm-hmm. But I want to go back to something you started with earlier, the idea of the governance. For example, in Somalia, we are trying to implement a federal system, and we're having some issues. In fact, we're having problems. And it seems, as you were saying, in Ethiopia, that didn't work either. So the question for ask you is, what do you think is the alternative? In other words, how is it possible to wind back and say, look, let's go back to the central government system and forget about this federal system, or modify it in such a way that it works just like it works in other countries? Even in Australia, we have a federal system. Yes, we have our own minor issues here and there, but overall, it seems to work, and there's no problem, even in the United States or elsewhere. So can you just talk about that a bit more? How do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think governance is quite a challenge in Africa. There's no question about that. It's quite a challenge. And I was telling you earlier when we were on the phone that about Somalia is also another tragedy that's been going on. I mean, I went to school when I was doing my master's graduate studies in Montana State with Somalis. They were actually, we are all part of the African American student Afgrad program. This is like in the mid-80s. Mogadishu was fine. They were just like any other African country, any other African city, no problems. Fast forward to 1991, and things start, basically when Siad Barre died, things started falling apart, And I always tell my friends, for me, Somalia is a special tragedy because Somalia is the only country that I know in Africa that has one ethnicity, one language, one religion, and the devil has managed to create problems between them along clan lines, and they've been on war for 40 years. It's incredible. It is completely incredible. I just cannot imagine it, you know. But here we are. Here we are. And you know what? The other powers are doing all they can to stop all the differences. If you take the case of Somaliland, for instance, okay, if you listen to the BBC, which a few weeks ago I wrote an article saying that I've started boycotting them. I don't listen to the BBC, I don't watch them anymore now. If you listen to the BBC or watch the BBC, they always make it a point of duty to always talk about Somaliland, because they want to reinforce the division in the minds of people that there are two Somalias, Somalia and Somaliland, you know, because Somaliland is a British colony, you know, so they want to create that. Even in the conflict in Ethiopia, as they did in the conflict in Liberia, civil war in Liberia, I would hold the BBC responsible for fanning the flames, in part by virtue of the access that they give to the rebel groups. Like when Charles Taylor was in the bush, every now and again, Robin White would call him from the bush, okay, on a satellite phone, you know, and the guy was in blue, and just basically get everybody scared and all of that. So the thing is, I again would like to urge Somalis to really look at themselves again, you know, and we say in my language, when somebody tells you to take a bath, it's because they want you to look beautiful. I want Somalis to really look at themselves again. Why have we been actually able to find ourselves in this situation for 40 years? We're the only country in Africa that is one ethnicity. We speak one language. We have one religion, but we've been at war for 40 years. It's very sad. It's really, really, really very sad. You have the longest coastline in Africa. Imagine the development potential and the possibilities that were there. But yet still, there has been, you know, when the US came to Somalia in 1991, peace building mission, and then they had a problem with General Farah Eji. You know, they put a bounty on his head. You know, I even tell my friends, they're really wasting their time, because one thing they have done in putting a bounty on Farah Eji's head is that they have underestimated the values of the Somalis in terms of their own allegiances to each other. And I said to them that Somalia might be dirt poor, but imagine there is no ticker for the $1 million prize that was put on Aidi's head. Nobody, as poor as the people were, nobody was interested in taking it. In other words, what was more important to them was their loyalty to clan and to their personal word than the short-term gains of getting $1 million from the United States. In the end, I tell people, Aidid was killed because of injuries he sustained from bullet wounds. Bullets were probably less than $5 or something like that, you know. And it goes to show the irony, you know, in all of this, you know. And so regarding the question, coming back to your question, so whether you have a federalist or a unitary state, I think it's up to you to decide. Somalia has enough educated people to figure this out if they really were interested in trying to figure it out. What's important is for people to come together, you know, to really start rebuilding your country. Now, it's going to be more difficult by the day, because the more this thing drags on, the more many of you who are critical to the struggle to bringing Somalia back together again get actually settled down. Your families take roots or put down roots in other countries, be it Australia, be it the United States. Look at Ilhan Omar in the United States. You know, she's already put down her roots in the United States. And so it becomes even more difficult to get critical mass of people to get back to Somalia itself and get things done. But I think it has to be done. It's a task that has to be done. Yeah. So basically, I'm sorry I dodged your question. I didn't say this or that, but I said, again, it's really for the Somali people to get back to it. You have to look at what works for you. The United States is doing fantastic with their federalist system, even though there are a lot of problems with that. But like you said, Australia is doing fine with it. And so I think Somalia can find its own level in all of this. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Katim. Well said, and Berhan said similar things last week. The thing is, I could also perhaps say the same or paraphrase them, but it's better to hear from other friends so that my folks will understand it's not just another Somali saying this, but other people also view this in a different way, and hopefully they will listen. Now, as you were talking, I remembered, and by the way, there are 2 questions already, but I want to take this opportunity that I, long time ago, caught up with Wally Shiyunka in Indonesia. He was giving a talk in some writers festival. And I remember him saying, you know, someone asked him, you guys are so smart. Why is it you're having all these problems in your countries? So I want to paraphrase what he said. And the comment was, he said, you're asking me, what am I doing? He said, I'm dying of shame. So that's how I feel as a Somali. You know, I mean, all what you said is spot on. One country, one language, one religion. We can say one. And yet, for some reason, we just can't see that similarity. We're saying the differences, which is a minute detail, nothing of any significance. But I'll stop there because Hassan and Abdulrazak both raised their hands. So Hassan, to you, please. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mr. Torre, for great analysis. I just want to explore with you a bit more on where you started with the conversation on over-reliance of Africans, of Western people. Now, coincidentally, I was talking to a Somali friend just a couple of hours ago, and we were talking about the delayed Somali election. And he said to me, oh, no, it will happen soon. And I said, why do you say that? And he said there was some kind of either press release or tweet by US embassy in Somalia. So in other words, he was relying on that tweet than anything else to ensure. And the tweet essentially was urging different states of Somalia to hold the parliamentary election before the end of the year. So my question is this a legacy of colonialism still in the mindset of Africans, or is it, as you put it, African leaders who relinquish their duty and their power and service to the Africans? What is the reason for that, and how do we address it? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hassan. I think you've raised a very important question. You know, we first have to understand that many African countries, in fact, not all of us, African countries, were creations by Western countries, Western colonialists. You know, just the other day, I was thinking to myself, you know, they had a Berlin African Conference of, was it 1865 or whatever have you, where they basically, the powers that were then in Europe sat down with a map of Africa and decided to divide it amongst themselves. You know, we're all familiar with the story in our own history lessons. And I thought to myself, how come in all these years we've never had a similar African conference to talk about unifying Africa? If the Europeans met to divide Africa, we Africans should meet to unite Africa, you know? I mean, I'm talking about we should organize a huge African conference to talk about African unity, just as the Europeans had a huge conference in Berlin in the 1860s to divide Africa, you know? But the problem is we have a situation where it's a combination of two things. One is bad leadership, the leadership that's more interested in their own personal interests. Look at what happened in Cote d'Ivoire. You know, they had a war after the elections. Gbagbo was, you know, captured, taken over to the Hague and tried and whatever have you. And now what happened? He came back and he hugged Alassane Ouattara, and all those 3,000 or so old people that died, they just died in vain for nothing. A similar situation happened in Kenya between Uhuru Kenyatta and the other guy, Raila Odinga. When this guy, then US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, came to Nairobi, brought them together. They broke wine and had a glass of wine, and then drank wine, and they became buddy friends. And then all the people who died in the conflicts that ensued after the elections, basically died for nothing, you know. And I'm glad you were saying, this guy was saying that was dying of shame, because it's a shame for any African to really witness that in the world, in the world stage, you know. And besides that, the problems with the leadership we also have this problem that the rest of the world, especially Western countries, will never ever leave us alone by virtue of their vested interest in the resources that we have. Look at, for instance, the situation in West Africa. For many, many years, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has been working on setting up the ECO as a regional currency for all the West African countries. Okay, the next thing you know, okay, Macron flies into Ivory Coast. Okay, they organize a meeting of some Francophone West African states and say that they are going to have their own ECO, you know, for the French-speaking countries. I mean, they basically torpedoed the West African ECOWAS plan to have their own ECO. And to make matters worse, they have the same name that the ECOWAS is planned to use for the regional currency. So it was a good thing that Ghana came out and said, well, they don't care about what these guys are doing. They're going to go ahead with the plan to have a West African ECO. But we all know the incredible hold that France had, chokehold that France has on the economies of West African countries and its former African colonies. You know, we don't want to go into all of that, but suffice it is to say that it is a very parasitic relationship that France has with its African colonies. And France knows that without its African colonies, it's not going to be anything in the world. You know, I tell people in 2007, when France sent its troops, the Sangares troops, into Mali to help them stabilize the government and fight against the Islamists, I tell people that was the saddest day of my life, because I thought to myself, you know, my last name Toure is the same as the last name of Almami Samori Toure, one of the great African leaders who fought against French occupation of West Africa many, many years. He in fact ended up being kidnapped by the French and exiled to Gabon, where he died. And then it was after that his body was repatriated and reburied in Guinea. But I thought to myself, all the years, all the struggle, all the effort that Almami Samori Toure did to fight against French occupation of West Africa, only for us to find ourselves in a situation where you have 700 or so French troops coming to stabilize Mali. It's a disgrace. It's a shameful thing to have. And it's still going on. It's still going on. We're still being used as pawns. As I was explaining to Ibrahim the other day when we had a call, going back to the conflict in the Ogaden, when the Soviet Union supported Ethiopia with help of Cuban troops, then they defeated Somalia, okay? What happened also as a result of that was that Somalia firmly came into the orbit of the United States, okay? Before that, they had very strong relationship with the Soviet Union, to the point where the Soviets built a military base, a naval base in Berbera, okay? Around that time too, the United States was kicked out of Vietnam. And Vietnam, because of the support and the help of the Soviet Union, basically re-established and re-strengthened the relationships with the Soviet Union. So what happened? We had a swapping of bases, okay? The Soviets took over the Vietnam the military naval base at Cam Ranh Bay that was built by the Americans. And the Americans took over the military base that was built by the Soviets in Berbera. You know, in what way we were left holding the bag, you know. So I think, Hassan, to come back to your question, the work has to start with us. We have to have leaders that are genuinely interested in African development, in the welfare and the lot of our people, that are ashamed of what the situation we're in. We need leaders that are proud to be Africans, that are proud of themselves. Something along the lines of Thomas Sankara. Despite all the deficiencies and the difficulties we had with him, you know, I mean, because I think Sankara was almost infantile. I mean, he had the zeal, but I don't think he had the technical skills that was required to basically build a nation. You know, he was a very young guy, military guy, and all of that. I don't think he had the intellectual sophistication. He knew what the problem was, you know, but we need something like that. We need somebody who says, look, we're sick and tired of all of this, and we're going to do something about this and move people forward. the reality has been that if you look at the likes of China, South Korea, it's all about leadership and really galvanizing people and rallying them around a common cause, which is national development. Simple. Another example I always give people is Singapore. Singapore had independence the same year, 1965, as the Gambia did. As a matter of fact, Singapore, I wouldn't call it independent because they were basically thrown out of the union with Malaysia by Malaysia. Lee Kuan Yew was crying when he addressed the Singaporeans to tell them, look, we are going to have to go on our own because Malaysia doesn't want us anymore. And then what happened? Through hard work, you know, you've been to Singapore, Ibrahim, when we had the ICANN meeting there, you saw what's there. Now look at what Singapore is. So I think, Hassan, the ball is in our court. And as much as I blame the Western world, the other countries for interfering in our affairs, I blame us more. It is us as a people that need to come up with leadership that basically is going to take the interests of our people at heart. That's what.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. I can ask you more questions on that, but I want to allow Abdulrazak first, and then we'll finish with Zahra. So Zahra, just excuse me, but Abdulrazak was, yeah, go ahead, Abdulrazak.
Hi, Katim, how are you? Good morning.
I'm doing fine, Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Great.
Katim, you know, it's good that you have the passion, you know, to hold the continent together, which is really good. You know, I really like that passion. I see a lot of passion, you know, the way you explain about Africa and how you like that the continent to progress. But, you know, unfortunately, you can see that now what's happening in Ethiopia and with the Somalis, even though, as you said, we speak the same language, we're all the same faith, but the problem is it's still really hard, you know, to get, you know, a good governance easily, you understand? And basically, so the question I have for you is that, you know, is this sectarianism that we have in the East of Africa at the moment, you know, what's happening in East Africa, is it, you know, can we say, is it fair to say that it's, you know, it's not widespread in the West Africa? You guys don't have these kind of problems happening every now and then, even though there was some problems in Ivory Coast, I heard, you know, a couple of years ago.
Well, thank you so much, Abdulrazak, for your question. I think I only wish I could say no, but the reality is that the answer is yes. We do have our problems. As right now, look at what's happening in Nigeria. You know, and so Nigeria with over 200 million people would make Ethiopia as serious as it is child's play. You know, and I always tell people, let's not forget that Nigeria fought a civil war that was largely driven by ethnic issues. You know, when Nigeria gained independence, they had a federalist system based on the regions. There were like about 3 regions: the Western region, the Eastern region, and the Northern region. Okay, and they had their ethnic, ethnic conflicts. You know, and in the end, what happened was they went into a civil war where the Eastern region wanted to break away, okay? And after like about 30 months, you know, there was a Biafra war, they declared Biafra, which was strongly supported by France and other countries that were interested in the oil wealth and resources. But in the end, the Biafrans lost and Nigeria became whole again. Now, what happened was, after the civil war, it was Gowon who was the military leader. He said, okay, what we're going to do now is to break up Nigeria into different states. So they created 19 states to basically cater for the calls to decentralize the central government, okay? So they had 19 states for all these years. And then the struggle continued, okay? And then, when was it? I forgot the date, but they ended up breaking up the country again further into 36 states. And to this day, they are still talking about creating more states. To this day, they are still talking about creating more states. Now, what's happened now is that they've had the dual problem of the issue of Boko Haram and the Islamic insurgencies, Islamic terrorism, you know, and the issue of the Fulani herdsmen encroaching into lands that are owned by sedentary Southerners as grazing lands for their cattle. And now, in all of this, you have to understand that Buhari, the president, is a Fulani guy. That's his ethnicity. And people are saying that Buhari actually doesn't care about what the Fulanis are doing. These Fulanis are armed, they go into southern states and basically shoot people and kill people, and nothing basically comes out of it, you know? And now, because of that, there are some who are saying that we want out of Nigeria. In the West, there are some Westerners who say, the Yorubas who say they want their own Yoruba land. In the East, there are now calls for revitalization of efforts to create Biafra again, or a kind of a Biafra in the southeast of the country. So those problems are brewing there, you know. My only hope is that I remember many years ago I was in Nigeria, and I heard one of their representatives, senators, or whatever, House of Representatives, saying that, look, at the end of the day, none of us wants to live in a smaller country than Nigeria, you know. And so maybe that might be the glue that brings the country together, that they know that they really, and somebody told me that even if you divide Nigeria into 100 states, you're still going to have problems. It's a big country, you know, so what is going to be the ideal limit? I think what they have to do is to basically, what they have to do is to basically understand that what's more important is for them to work together. Nigeria has a lot of resources, human resources, material resources, mineral resources, and all of that. Nigeria aside, if you go next door to Cameroon, they now have the problem of a separatist movement in what they call Ambazonia, the Ambazonia movement. Now, what happened was, at independence, there was this part of Anglophone Nigeria that had the option of either joining Nigeria or joining Cameroon, okay? They decided to go with Cameroon, and they became the minority English-speaking part of Cameroon. And now they felt that they've been sidelined by the majority French-speaking part, and say they have a serious fight that's going on there now, and lives are being disrupted, people are being killed, kids are being maimed in school and being killed and all of that. Over what? They say they want independence. They want their own republic of Ambazonia, you know? I'm not even going to get into the details of what's happening in the Sahel, you know, in Niger, for instance, in Mali, you know. I was in Mali in 2010 on assignment for an environment program, and I met at the time the Minister of Environment. He was a Tuareg guy, you know. There was nothing really a problem there. But now Mali has become almost like a no-go zone because of the separatist movement, the Tuaregs and the Islamic, fighters there, the Islamic Jihad in the Maghreb, ISWAP, the Islamic State of West Africa province, what they call the ISWAP, you know. And a lot of this basically has been fueled, if not actually caused, by the demise of Gaddafi in Libya. Not that Gaddafi didn't have his own problems, but the problem is that when he fell, his regime fell, you had all of a sudden a lot of weapons that were let loose in West Africa, and then of course fueled by the Islamic fundamentalism and all of that. This is the result that is produced now in Senegal, just next door. For many years, they had this problem where Senegal, of course, is almost divided in two by the Gambia. And then the southern part, which is south of the Gambia, they are an ethnic group called the Jolas. They felt that they've been marginalized and sidelined. So they said they wanted their own independence. And the Casamance problem has been brewing for quite a number of years. Fortunately, the Senegalese government has managed to contain it. So it's now a little bit quiet, but there's no guarantee that it's going to be like that forever, you know. And I could go on and on and on. Sierra Leone, of course, had its civil war. You know, Liberia had their civil war. Yes. I remember in 1997, I was in the United States. A Sierra Leone friend of mine, they were having like wedding vows, you know, with his wife. He said, okay, you'll be my best man. And I was. And so they had lunch. And they had friends from all over the world, the United States, Canada, from the UK, and everywhere. And I was the only Gambian, I was the only non-Sierra Leonean in that group when we had the lunch. And quietly in my mind, I was thinking to myself, what's wrong here? These are all very intelligent people, highly educated people. What happened until their country just went to hell in a handbasket? This is 1997, like the peak of the Civil War, you know, And I just like, it just disturbed me. And you could say the same for many African countries. You have highly educated people that just for whatever reason, just haven't been able to manage to bring themselves together to see the greater interest that they have of working together, and it's just very sad. This, I think, is the African tragedy, if you ask me. So, at the result, to come back to your question, unfortunately, what's happening in Ethiopia is not exclusive to Ethiopia. It exists in various forms in other African countries, mostly because we have not, our leadership have not managed to come to terms with the reality that's Africa today, that we are multi-ethnic, and we need to deal with that fact and then move on. As a matter of fact, I just wrote an article last week on the same, similar to Ibrahim might have seen it. It's called "We Are One," to prove to Gambians that despite the ethnic differences, we are all in the end all the same people. We have multi-ethnic marriages, mixed marriages, and all of that. As a matter of fact, by the way, I'm just right now working on an article this week on Ethiopia because I thought, even though in the Gambia we're busy with the elections that are coming up, we should all take time to reflect on what's happening in Ethiopia. And if anything, at least pray for peace, there, and sanity, a return to sanity in there. Yeah. I hope I've answered your question, Abdul.
That was very comprehensive. Now in Somali we say ladies last. No, I'm just joking.
Oh, okay,
But I'll let Zahra last question to ask you. So Zahra, over to you, and we have only 5 minutes left. So please go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, Katim.
Hi, Zahra. How are you?
I'm good.
I hear you're a politician, right?
Yeah, I'm running for politics. Yes.
Really? Oh, fantastic. I wish you all the very best. Inshallah, you will win, I'm sure. Okay? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talked about it. Africa don't have a leaders, and there's 52 countries. How do these leaders be if there is no leaders? How do we gonna get leaders that can come up and lead the continent and the countries? How? Because no one can help build African in each country. They have to do it themselves. And I believe diaspora need to shut up, stay away from it, and not get involved. And people who are on the ground can make a change. So how do you find the leaders, and how do you create leaders in the content in Africa?
Off the top of my head, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we are going to need to have the change, in my opinion, it's not going to come from the top because they are entrenched in the way they do things. It's not going to come from outside because they also have a vested interest in the state of things now. That leaves only one option. That is change that comes from below and from within.
Yep.
By which I mean the present generation of African youth, they are very much connected to the world. It's not like you and me when we were growing up, especially Ibrahim. All we had there was no TV, there was nothing. These guys, that the Facebook generation, basically, they are connected with the rest of the world. They see what's going on outside. And they insist also on having a quality of life that's at par with what's happening in the rest of the world. If not a quality of life, at least a degree of independence, okay, and freedoms that they see in other parts of the world. So they are going to have to organize, and they are organizing. They are going to organize and basically gradually, like a volcano, basically. Like you see what's happening in Las Palmas for this past few weeks. There's going to be outpouring of rage. Sometimes it's very imperceptible, but the change is happening. I'll tell you a story. My wife was telling me that our 18-year-old son was told her, he's 17. Told her, you say, Mom, you guys are a complete failure, that it's going to take our generation to change this country. And I believe him, because for them, they've grown up seeing what's happening in the rest of the world. They always will genuinely and rightly so ask themselves, why not us? What's wrong? For me and you, Ibrahim, and Dr. Ahmed, I always tell people, look, if an American sneers at me, looks down on me, it's not because of anything but because of my leadership. because I've been to school in the US. I beat them in class, you know. I know many of them, they know I am smarter than them, you know. So why would they want to look down on us, except for the fact that they've been given an opportunity to do so by our leadership, you know. So coming back to your question, Zara, I'm putting my bet on the African youth, the present African generation. They have their challenges also because they have been basically dealt a very bad card. In many African countries, the education system is messed up. But despite all those challenges, there is no option but for them to really fight and then get back the rights and the dignities that we in Africa deserve. Is my hope. And I'm sure, inshallah, we'll hopefully see it all. Yeah, all of us will see it. Yeah.
Thank you.
We all
Thanks.
Africa.
Sorry, Zahra, you were saying?
I'm saying that your comment, people looking down on Africa, and I usually say to people, everyone is from Africa. So the whole world is, everyone is African.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. We're all Africans at the end of the day. Well, but see, the problem also is that I think psychologically, the Western world needs somebody to look at every evening in their news and say, aha, we are doing better than these people. They need like what they call a whipping boy. Huh? Some sort of like a bad ship in the family of humanity, you know. Somebody they can look at. I remember one day I was talking to a US friend of mine, and she was saying, oh God, I'm so glad I'm an American. I told her, yeah, I'm so glad I'm Gambian too. You know, that the pride is not exclusive to them. Some Americans especially don't even understand why Africans should feel proud to be Africans. I mean, that's how bad the situation is, you know, and we need to fix that, you know, that's what.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we just running out of time, but I really want to thank you all. This was really very educational, informative, and sometimes even entertaining, but really, we will invite you again, Katim. I enjoyed the talk. And just to finish with a positive note, in fact, this week we have achieved a few milestones. We sold the first NFT, would you believe, all the way from Mogadishu. So this is like cutting edge.
Interesting.
There was a Somali YouTuber giving 1 million to the refugees in Syria. So yes, we're down, but we're not out. So
Alhamdulillah, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
So we'll be back. I want to thank you all. We've got lots of other events happening, but Katim, you even make me homesick because as you were talking, I could also hear some birds.
Oh yes, yeah, it's early morning here. So
I'm enjoying the birds, by the way.
It is early morning here, so the birds are just chirping.
Yeah, it's getting a bit dark here. Sorry, go ahead, Bran.
Before you close, well, look, it was really great talk, Katim. And what I think is now, given what we said now, if you were to be asked, and all of us to be asked, if we were to solve Africa problem, 3 words, what can we say? I'm sorry to put you in that challenge.
When Katim
I would say leadership. I would say leadership. I would say education and the youth. Those 3 would be key to Africa's salvation.
What's the third one?
Leadership, the youths, and education.
Empowering youth.
Yeah, through education and then having the right leadership.
Yes, but don't you think if we go back to the history of the Commonwealth and others, how did they reach to where they are today was first elimination of hunger. People have to be fed, health, and education. These 3 are the key of healthy working society. Education is important, but starving people, and they are, how can you make them educated? Unhealthy people, how can you help them? So if you look to America, Australia, New Zealand, and all these Commonwealth countries, particularly UK too, back after the First World War and the Second World War, the steps the countries have taken was fighting hunger, health, and then education.
So we found
but-
one
but,
element you have in common, but I really want now you, Berhan, you're setting the agenda for the next meeting. So
Right, exactly. but I was going to say people are hungry because of poor leadership. People have bad healthcare system because of poor leadership. And so it all goes back to the lack of leadership and lack of education and this youth, because that's the future of Africa. Yeah.
okay, in fact,
But anyway,
both of
that's
you-
the debate to be
yeah,
had.
if Berhan asked me that question, I was gonna say just easily I was gonna say three things: leadership, leadership, leadership. But
There you go.
How about when you come to my, because that is no question for me.
Yeah.
Leadership is critical. And you mentioned Kwan Lee, he was a nationalist. Mahathir was a nationalist, but dictators. In Africa, we got dictators, but not nationalists.
yeah,
Yeah,
And that's the
exactly.
difference.
we already have the agenda for the next meeting. So Katim, I will talk to you over the week, and hopefully, if you have time, you will probably join us again. But it was really
Inshallah.
very
Thank you so
useful,
much.
the week that was. I want to thank you all. This will be on Facebook, and I'm sure there will be a lot of comments. I'm just going to forward them to you, Katim. I don't want to have answers for the questions.
No problem. No problem. But see, the
Thank you
only
very
problem,
much.
Ibrahim, I'm not I'm on Facebook, but I don't do Facebook actually.
So
You know?
the same, whether it's called
Yeah,
Metaverse or Meta or whatever
Maybe
it's
they'll
called.
send me the emails that people are commenting, but
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
I
Mohammed.
use it, but I don't let them use me. I use them.
Mohammed,
Okay.
before we
Yes.
close,
Yeah.
Katim, given he's in Africa, is there any chance we can have such conversation from the one of the AU members in the leadership, that we need to talk about, because we need to talk. Talk is missing.
Mhm.
So I think if
Okay,
Katim
I'll-
has got any link to help
I'll
us,
try to, yeah. I'll try to
with
get you some
one of the
contacts in the AU
Yes.
Commission.
Yeah.
please, that
Somebody,
will be
yeah.
wonderful, because we're talking to each other. We need to talk with others as well.
Right,
Sure.
yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, we'll get there, and hopefully other people are also listening, and hopefully they will reflect on this.
Inshallah, yeah.
So
Yes.
we'll
Yes.
do that. Well, thank you very much. Have a good weekend, whatever is left of the weekend. Thank you very much. I will
Okay.
continue until next week. Have a good one. See you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much, everybody. Have a good one.
Salam,
Thanks for
salam,
having
Katim.
me.
Thank you. Shukran.
Salam. All the best. Shukran.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Okay.